So we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all for being here today. We're going to be talking about how to be prepared for an emergency in your business, something most of us don't want to happen, but things we definitely need to be thinking about and be prepared for. So we're glad that you've all joined us today. I'm Hannah Curtis. I'm with the North Metro Small Business Development Center. So for any of you who aren't familiar with the SBDC, we offer free one-on-one consulting and also educational programming like these webinars and also some online courses. So I'll drop our URL into the chat here in a bit. If you want to check out our website, there's a lot of great resources on there and a great way to connect with us for consulting or for future events. And we are joined by Samantha Peasley. So we're so happy to have her with us. She's been with the SBDC as a legal consultant for years and attorney with Polaris Law Group. So definitely the person we want to be talking to when we're thinking about how to be prepared in our businesses. And we will be sending out these slides as well as the recording later on. So if you're scrambling to take notes, don't worry, you'll have all the resources. And you can also always access recordings from our sessions in the video library on our website. So all of the past sessions that we've done are all there. So would encourage you to check that out as well. And like I said, please make use of the chat. We want this to be interactive. And I think that's it. So Samantha, I will turn it over to you.
Sounds great. Thanks, Hannah. And thanks everybody for already participating a little bit here, telling us about what kinds of businesses you have. See some service type businesses in there as well as online sales. So we're going to have, I'll try and loop those in with some of the distinctions that we make here today, because we have all different kinds of small businesses, which means that sometimes a general topic like this is going to hit each of us a little differently. Like Hannah said, I'm Sam Peasley with Polaris Law Group. I serve as general counsel for small to medium-sized businesses. And within that, I personally specialize in transactions. So that's contracts, intellectual property, data privacy, and international transactions. We have others in our office who specialize in employment, in real estate, in dispute resolution. We all kind of work together on a lot of those. So we've seen a lot over the years of various things that can happen in the course of a small business, even ourselves personally. Sometimes things come up that we weren't necessarily prepared for. And we found that there are some things that businesses can do to help prevent that, as well as things that are a good idea for businesses to do when they're solopreneurs. So there is going to be a little bit of a back and forth between when you are a solopreneur versus when you're not within this presentation, because sometimes it's not about getting your employees ready. It's about what you can do to help your spouses, your family members, your siblings, if something were to happen to you. So, and you'll see the subtitle here, Practice and Policies for When You Aren't in an Active Emergency. We're hoping none of you are in an active emergency here today. If you are, and you might need to just jump off here and call 911 if that's the case. Hopefully not that kind of an emergency. We're going to talk about a number of different kinds of emergencies, but what we're assuming here is that none of us are in an emergency right now. We just want to know how we can help today to take some of that stress off for when we are in an active emergency. So with that, let's clarify some terms here, shall we? So we're using the word emergency. What exactly is an emergency? I've had this before where some people say, well, I'm not the sort of company that has an emergency. I'm a lawyer, or I'm an art retailer, or I am a financial planner, advisor, fiduciary. But everyone has emergencies. What those emergencies are may look a little bit different depending on your industry. And so everyone's emergencies are going to be slightly different. How they affect you is going to be slightly different. So, and even COVID-19, which was an emergency that affected all of us who were in business right then, affected each of us very, very differently. Some of us just had to make small tweaks in our lifestyle. Some of us had to have major overhauls of our system. Some of us might not even have had our businesses there, and we formed our business as a result of COVID-19, directly or indirectly. So we are going to be talking in a general sense about emergencies, but I like to make that caveat that what an emergency for Connie is might be different than what an emergency for Samantha is. I will pick on people from time to time too, if I can see your names. So I apologize in advance. So here, what's a general definition of emergency that we're using here? What we define as an emergency for the purposes of our conversation today is a somewhat to completely unexpected situation that requires immediate action and or resources. So you immediately have to put in money you didn't expect to spend. You immediately have to put in time to deal with it. You immediately need to take some kind of action. The emergency or event prevents your business from operating as per usual or at all for a significant period of time. And it incurs significant financial and personal resources as to create significant negative impact for your business. I said and, that's actually or. Those last two are ors. So it requires immediate action and either prevents you from operating as usual or incurs significant financial and personal resources. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about an emergency. So some of you may already be thinking of situations in your business that fall into this category. And some might not. And so I want to clarify a little bit before we keep going on somewhat to completely unexpected situation, because we are talking about planning. What I am not advocating in here is for everybody to start planning for the Godzilla scenario, which is my favorite scenario. The Godzilla scenario is what would happen if Godzilla started walking down the streets of Westminster tomorrow and stomping out businesses. Well, that would be a little unexpected, wouldn't it? And that would also require immediate action and resources. We would need to run out of the way. We would need to do something about it. It would probably prevent many of us from operating our businesses as usual. And if Godzilla happened to step on our business or our employees, that would incur significant resources. But we probably don't need to spend our resources now planning for the Godzilla scenario. We will anticipate that if things like the Godzilla scenario come up, that our plans for our somewhat unexpected situations will get us by, at least in the short run, as far as those go. So to back that up a little bit, what are we talking about with somewhat unexpected? We're talking about foreseeable situations and risks versus unforeseeable or less foreseeable situations and risks, the situations and risks that are only foreseeable with a very active imagination. So for example, weather conditions consistent with the area and climate. In Colorado, you need to know what happens if a blizzard comes up. And most of us have snow day plans. We know kind of, okay, we need to go pick up the kids. We tell people to work from home, kinds of things. We don't necessarily have plans for hurricanes in Colorado or floods. It does happen occasionally, but we probably don't need to build our emergency plans based on floods or hurricanes in Colorado in the same way that in Louisiana, even though it ices occasionally, that's probably not the best use of our resources to plan for that. Occupational hazards consistent with your industry. If you're in a lab, you need to know how to deal with chemical spills. If you have a restaurant, you need to know how to deal with grease fires. If you're in retail, you need to know how to deal with theft. If you're in online retail, that theft includes data theft. But if you're in retail, you don't need to know how to deal with the grease fire that would happen in somebody's restaurant. You kind of see the point that we're going with here. We don't need to deal with every possible emergency. We want to deal with these somewhat unexpected. Now, we none of us expected the global pandemic. That one was a surprise. That is not one that we typically need to have in our back pocket. Civil unrest is one that we are lucky enough in the United States to also not have to worry about too often. But obviously anybody who had a pandemic plan was able to institute that, and great for them. And if you feel that that is something that you would like to incorporate, you absolutely could with the tools that we're giving you today. But we're going to focus more on these things that are more likely to happen in our everyday, these somewhat unexpected, the foreseeable situations and risks. So how do we deal with these? Now that we know what emergencies we're talking about, what do we do? What we recommend for businesses are emergency preparedness plans. Now, again, I'm not going to try and get you to do an emergency preparedness plan for everything that could happen. And we're going to talk about 4 major categories today. But first, why have them? Well, first, if you're not a solopreneur, let's say that you work in a company with a couple of folks, or you work for the city, and so there's a number of people involved. Why have an emergency preparedness plan? If one person goes down, somebody else can just pick up the slack, right? But what we've seen a lot happen is one person goes down and that person has a key information or password that other people can't get. This is especially common today with multi-factor authentication. So if your payroll is linked to a single person that has a password and no one knows that password, no one has their computer, nobody has their personal phone to be able to get in there, all of a sudden you can't pay your employees. That may not feel like an emergency to you, but it may feel like an emergency to some of those employees, and it may be an emergency to some of those employees. So if you, even though you have those other people, does everybody know what everyone else does? Also, an emergency preparedness plan can decrease stress in the situation itself. In this case, you want to think about when we did fire drills at school as a kid. What's the point of the fire drill? So that you don't have 200 kids running around screaming like crazy if the fire alarm goes off, that they get up in an orderly fashion, they follow the teachers outside, there's no stress or very minimal stress associated with it because they're used to this. So these emergency preparedness plans have that same psychological effect. They also can reveal weaknesses in your system before it happens. We're going to talk about a couple of these things within plans themselves, but sometimes in creating an emergency preparedness plan, you realize, oh, I actually don't know where all of my client contracts are. If I were to have to go get those right now, I have no idea what's going on there. Oh, I don't have a month of expenses saved up if something goes on. That is a thing that I need to budget for. So sometimes by creating these plans, we actually reduce our need for the plans in the long run because we find these weaknesses in our system. It also creates a source of written information for somebody other than the person who puts it together in the midst of an emergency, which means that not everybody's coming to you to say, wait, where is this? Where am I going for this? Hannah, I have no idea what's happening here. Can you do this? And Hannah, meanwhile, is trying to make sure that she is getting everybody out of the burning building, or that she is actually making sure that that secondary bank account is still open up. So this can be really helpful for creating that secondary source of information. So that's my spiel for why this is important. Obviously, I'm preaching to the choir. If you're here already, you understand that this is a little bit important, but for taking the action item afterwards, that's why this is important if you're not alone. If you are alone, some people say that makes them feel more necessary to have these. Some say it makes it feel less necessary, because if I'm by myself, well, I can just do what I need to do in the event of an emergency. I just go evacuate. I just take the computer and I leave. Okay, reasonable. But if your business goes dark or you go down, if you walk out and get hit by a bus tomorrow, what's going to happen? If you had clients scheduled for the next week, who's going to tell them that you just got hit by a bus? If you're a solopreneur and you have those bills that need to be paid, how do your loved ones know how to pay those bills so that they don't get saddled with those personally? How do they even get access to your bank account? If you have $20,000 in there, it should go to them, but you were the only one on it. What happens? So these actually came out of the solopreneur experience, us starting to do these, because of situations where a solopreneur did not leave instructions, and loved ones dealing with a lot of grief were also left dealing with how to close out a business or how to transfer a business, sell a business to somebody else. So these can be exceptionally important as a solopreneur. They also, even if they're the kinds of emergencies that you deal with yourself, again, same ideas. It decreases stress in the situation itself. If you feel like you have a plan, then it can help you execute that plan better without necessarily raising your blood pressure. You know what's going on with this. You know what to do. Everything else you can deal with. It reveals those weaknesses in your system. If you need that budget, if you realize, I don't have a way to do this outside of my personal phone. And also for the solopreneurs, it can ensure that you have a team assembled before an emergency is actively occurring. Team's not necessarily employees, but it is who to call, who to touch base with in the event of a plan. So those are the reasons for having a plan. we're talking about this plan. What goes into a plan? 3 key things for any plan. They're pretty easy to remember. First one is, what's the emergency that the plan is dealing with? As we're going to talk about with 4 different kinds of emergency plans, you can have different kinds of emergency plans, but it's going to be hard to have a single catch-all emergency plan. Now, you do not need the Godzilla scenario. Your fire scenario is probably good for your Godzilla scenario. But what happens if a key employee goes out due to payroll is probably not going to be the same as your fire scenario. So we need to identify in our plans your what's. What is the actual emergency that you are planning for? This can be pretty broad, or you can make it pretty specific if you want to. You can give some illustrations, and we're going to talk about some of these illustrations in a bit here, as well as what is most likely to go wrong. What actually makes this an emergency? What is the problem that is caused by the emergency that you are going to need to solve? What are the likely consequences that you're actually trying to plan for here? And then what resources is it going to take in order to fix the emergency? So what is the actual consequence to your company? What do you need to make sure that you have in place before the emergency hits? So that's that first category of things that need to go in our plan. Then who's on first? Who's ready to go to bat during this emergency? This should be part of your emergency plan. Why? Because if they don't know that this is part of the emergency plan, then they can't help you fix it. As well as this is where we identify those gaps. Do you not have these people? So who is directly involved or the subject of the emergency? So if the potential emergency is a key employee going down, that's a person who's directly involved. We need to care about who that is. If there's a fire, who might be at the office building that needs to be evacuated at that point? Who are you going to want in the room to fix that emergency? It might be the same person as above. It might not. So for example, if a key employee goes down, that person likely isn't going to necessarily be in the room to fix the emergency. So who's your backup? Who's the other person who can help with that? Versus if it's a fire, yes, the people directly involved in the fire might also be the best ones to help fix or remedy the fire at that point. And then who do you want to be on call in the event of that emergency? Is this a situation where you call your insurance provider? Do you call your lawyer? Do you call the local police department? Do you call the key employee's spouse? So it's who's first there, who is the subject, who can help fix it immediately, and then who can be on call for those ripple effects. These all need to be in that plan. And then where do we go? Where is the emergency taking place? First of all, is it taking place at the office? Is it taking place in the cloud? Is it taking place on your website? Is it taking place at a client's house? So for any of you who do remote work at people's locations, sometimes you're not going to have any control over that place. Where do you then regroup? It's typically one of those things that we learned. This goes back to the fire drill concept. There was always a place that your class went out to meet for the fire drill, right? So the fire would have been taking place inside of the school, inside of the classroom, and your class was supposed to regroup by the slide. And maybe the kindergarten class was supposed to regroup by the monkey bars. But you need to have that meeting place where you regroup. And then where is this plan kept and maintained? So if something happens, where do we go find all this stuff that we went to go prepare? Is it in a cloud? Does everybody have a physical copy of it? Where is that kept? So that's your where's. What's, who's, where's. Those are the key points to building your plan. Once you have those with your team, you get them together and you create this plan. It can be very in-depth. There are some larger companies that have very extensive emergency plans for certain scenarios. It can be really and truly outline format. Basically, you list your what's, you list your who's, you list your where's, you list a couple of other FAQs in there. Anybody who's part of that who, at the very least, should be touched base with for any of these portions of the plan. And then you want to break down what happens first. Notification, letting everybody know that there is an emergency. And this will make a little bit more sense, I think, when we go into some of those examples. But if a key employee does go down, how do you get notified? If you're the one notifying, who do you need to notify? What order do those notifications need to go in? Obviously, with a personal injury or emergency, you want to notify family, spouse, but you probably actually want to notify the emergency services first. And that can be one that isn't necessarily intuitive in the moment. For some people it is, for some people it isn't. And so internalizing this can help with that plan. Stop the bleeding. Always the first thing first. Stop the bleeding, stop the active emergency to the extent that you can. If there's fire, do you throw water on it? There's a grease fire, do not throw water on. Get the fire extinguisher. Literally stop the bleeding if that's the case. If there is a security leak, shut everything down, stop putting things into that cloud. So first you isolate that incident, stop the bleeding. Then once the bleeding is stopped, you take your proactive responses. Okay. That's kind of the emergency cleanup mode in some people's minds, but you're still technically in that active emergency. That proactive response is the thing that often takes those resources. So that might be, all right, we've shut down the bank account because somebody was pulling money from the bank account. Now we're going to talk to the bank and see where our clients can pay us while that bank account is isolated and shut down. And then we're going to talk to our attorneys, figure out how we do an investigation. We're going to talk to our insurance company, tell them that we just lost $20,000 out of our bank account and we need to file a claim. Those are the things that once we've shut down that bank account, we've isolated it. Now we're going to go into action mode. Then how do we regroup? What a lot of people don't think about in the heat of an emergency is going back and letting people know where progress is, or saying it's not an emergency anymore, we've got it, we're good. Well, that puts other people under stress. They think that you're still in emergency mode, or they're worried about what happens next. They're waiting for that call. So regroup time is usually a good time to say, okay, what have we done? Who did we notify? What do we need to tell them now? What kind of updates do we need to give? Do we tell people it's safe to come back? Do we need to do some new training? So that regroup time is that take a deep breath and give people an update as far as what's going on in there. And then for some emergencies that might loop back around. So sometimes that break it down cycle comes back around again, that there are a couple of notify, proactive, regroup after there. Hopefully the stop the bleeding only happens the one time, but that can be a more ongoing process. And then at the end of your plan, it's always a good idea to have a couple of points as far as some other things that could go wrong, and maybe an emergency contact number, not a full new emergency plan for each of those. But let's say that it's something where you need your attorney and your attorney's on vacation. What do you do? Well, if you say, well, I talked to Sam about that, and she said that if she's on vacation, still notify her office and someone else in her office will take care of it. Great. Now we have peace of mind. We can put that in the plan if we want. We don't have to. What happens if the person's phone on which they do multi-factor authentication was destroyed, and we don't have access to that anymore? Do we have a backup call? Well, that might be calling the payroll provider and saying, hey, what happens if we lose a device for multi-factor authentication and someone has an emergency? And then they tell you their process. And so you say, okay, great. So if that happens, we call the payroll provider and say magic words X, Y, and Z, and then they will help get us back on our way. So those what could go wrongs, those most common FAQs, any of those things that are just bothering somebody in the group of like, we have this great plan, but if this thing falls out of it, it doesn't work anymore. Those can be a really good thing to put at the end of that plan. And then you actually use the plan. So you don't want to then shut this in a box and never see it again. People won't necessarily remember it. So some plans are good for a walkthrough. That is literally the fire drill. Does everybody know to go to the slide? Because the kids aren't necessarily going to remember that. If you don't do it often enough, it's going to go out of their mind. Some things don't require a walkthrough. Some things don't require scenario planning, but it does help people remember it better. And that is part of that stress mitigation, as well as part of that finding those weaknesses. Oh, well, you know, when we did the walkthrough, it turns out that Karen doesn't actually save her passwords in a reasonable place. We need to fix that issue. Have written copies where they're needed. A lot of times cloud-based is very good for that. Usually you want at least 2 locations though, maybe one on the cloud, one printed out somewhere. Maybe one on this place in the cloud, one on a private server. Then you want to make sure that anyone on your team knows your role. You don't want someone to be surprised that in the event of a fire, they're the call 911 guy. That they are the one who is supposed to just be on the phone and calling 911 while everyone else takes care of everything. Obviously, you don't need to necessarily loop in some of your professionals who do this on a regular basis. Your bank doesn't need to know, hey, if somebody steals from our bank account, we're going to call you. Yes, they assume that. That's okay. If they have a role that is unusual for them as a bank, they might need to know that, and they might need to give you updates on what they can and can't do there. It's good to check these on at least an annual basis. Passwords change. So if you have everybody's password list or how to get into their phone and they now have a new phone, that might be a moot point now. It doesn't mean that everything needs a full rehaul on an annual basis, but you should at least be touching base on that. Or if your insurance provider's number has changed, if you've changed insurance providers, well, you don't want someone calling the wrong insurance personnel in the event of an emergency. So you at least want to be updating this on an annual basis, annual meetings for your company sort of thing. And then you want it to be accessible. If you're the only person who can find this, it doesn't do a lot of good if you go down and the plan for what to do if you go down can't be found by anybody. You see what I mean on that one? So this should be considered sort of an active document. All right. Any questions before we get into some 4 common emergency scenarios for small businesses that can kind of illustrate how you use these?
Doesn't look like we have questions right now. So I think we're excited for that next section. And then as any of you do have questions, feel free to put them in there. We'll have some time at the end to go over those.
Absolutely. So we've come up with 4 common emergencies for businesses. Some of you may not feel that these are emergencies. So remember, our definition for this is that it is a somewhat to completely unexpected scenario that costs you time and resources and potentially puts a stop on your business operations. So first and foremost, the one that I think people are going to be least likely to call an emergency is a lawsuit. But at the same time, this can feel very much like an emergency when it happens. So remember, with each of these, we're going to go through our what, whose, where's, and then some other takeaways. And I know that the text is a little bit smaller on this. You all will get the PowerPoints as a result. I just want these to be good for you afterwards. So hypothetically, what's our what here? What's the actual emergency? You get served notice that a past client is going to sue you in Adams County, Colorado for $1 million for damages you caused in providing your services. Your company is named, as well as you personally as the owner. Well, that feels like an emergency. What makes this an emergency? First, you and the company don't have $1 million, so that's not good or fun. Additionally, lawsuits are time consuming. This could take up to 2 years before it gets resolved, which could take a lot of your personal time, time attending hearings, depositions, getting together discovery responses, talking to your attorneys, going through the other side's discovery responses. So it's a very big time and resource suck, as well as whatever it's costing you for those attorneys. Lawsuits are public, so they could hurt your reputation. That can make that more of an emergency in some people's minds, less of an emergency in others. And if you don't respond within a certain period of time after receiving the notice, a default judgment could be entered against you. Remember, one of those things we said that creates an emergency is the immediateness of it. So a lawsuit is very immediateness, because if you get served, you have to respond fairly quickly, or there are very serious monetary consequences. So that's the what. What's not included in here as far as the what goes are the types of services here. Obviously, that's a little bit vague for all of you, but if you know what kinds of services you have that are more likely to be high risk versus lower to be high versus less high risk, you can also include that in your emergency plan to help you differentiate a little bit. So who needs to be involved in this? Well, first and foremost, your insurance company. Why? Because if you don't have $1 million, that's who you're relying on to actually have $1 million. So they are going to often be that first call. Now, part of that is going to be determining whether this falls within your claims. And so that might go back into the what falls under your insurance policies versus what does not. Most of them, if you have a professional liability policy, these kinds of money losses will be covered by that. If you just have a general business policy with some physical location, purely economic losses may not be covered. And so it's good to know in that what section, what kinds of lawsuits is your insurance company going to cover. Your company attorney, very important as far as that goes. If you have a regular one, fantastic. If you don't, the who on here might be how to get that company attorney very quickly. Always better to have that in advance if possible, because you hate to shop around on a very short notice, especially if you're not sharing ideals with that particular attorney. But there are times when your regular company attorney won't be able to represent you. So that might be a good conversation to have with them of, if it's this kind of case, do I get to use you? Now, your insurance company may also want you to use their attorney. That can cut down that time. That goes back to that what kinds of claims would allow me to use the insurance company's attorney rather than my own. You obviously matters. This is the owner of the business or the person personally named in the lawsuit. So you definitely need to be involved in here. But that then brings up anyone who is named in the lawsuit, whether in that front caption of they're being personally sued, or as you go through and read the complaint, if it's talking about little Susie, who was coming and providing the service for this customer. Susie isn't named in the lawsuit. She was one of your employees, but she's in all of those facts. That might be a really important person to get on board as far as that goes, because she will have important facts and relevant conversations there. And then anyone else who worked with that client, sometimes they're not necessarily named there, but they might have important information pertaining to. So when you have that lawsuit, you're looking at those kinds of who's. So then what's our where's? Well, obviously we care that it's in Adams County, Colorado. That matters. That can also matter as far as the attorney goes. So if you're getting sued in California, your attorney may be a Colorado attorney and say, I can't help you with that. We need to get you Colorado counsel or California counsel instead. But then we also care about where the information from that client relationship is. So if it's a sale, so if you're in a retail business, where's the contract? Where's the correspondence? Where's the shipping confirmation? Where is the proof of payment? If it's a services client, where's the contract? Where's the back and forth communications? Maybe where's the statement of work or an estimate? Where are all the emails? Where are all the texts? That's all going to be important to get together, preferably as quickly and painlessly as possible. Where is your insurance policy? We said that should be a little bit in the what, but at the same time, we're probably going to need that information at that point also. So where do we keep that? Where are your company organizational documents? Ideally, they're in a nice little corporate book somewhere in your office or with your attorney. Those company documents are going to be what prevents you from being personally liable in this lawsuit, assuming a number of factors, but those are important as far as that goes. And then where is the dispute resolution supposed to happen? So if you have a contract that says you have to sue me in Adams County, Colorado, if you sue me and they sue you in California, that's a really important thing to know. And that's a really important clause to have in there. If it says that they need to go to mediation first, that is also important to know. So where are your dispute resolution clauses? How do you find those? And another important thing on here, we're talking about information from the contract. If Susie was the employee who worked on this, Susie isn't there anymore. Where are Susie's communications with those clients? Where did Susie go? If you need her as a key witness, are you able to still talk to her? So where are all these things? And then some additional key recommendations. So you got your what, you got your who's, you got your where's. Those should always go in there. And then I did mention a couple of these things, but these are things that come up as potential weaknesses. So remember, we said one of the benefits of the plans are identifying your weaknesses and your gaps. So one of our weaknesses might be, why might I need a different attorney for this? sometimes you need a different attorney because the issue is over the contract and the attorney did the drafting for the contract. So the attorney might say, I can't actually represent you. I'm going to be a key witness here. I am one of the people whose actions are at issue here. Some attorneys just don't do a dispute resolution. And sometimes your insurance company might say, well, if you want us to cover it, you have to use our attorney. So there are some different reasons that your attorney might not work. Now, again, we don't want a Godzilla scenario. Do we need to find an attorney in every state that we might ever possibly do business in? Probably not. But it's a good idea to have that conversation and say, hey, if I was to get sued in this state, what processes could you help me with? How would we go about this? Or I am now doing a lot of work in this state. Is that a good time to kind of fill this gap or weakness here? That's one thing. Document storage and retention plan. Make sure that you have that. If you're realizing, I don't know where I would get everything for my client, well, that might be a good time to kind of step away from the emergency plan for a moment and focus on our document storage and retention processes. If you realize that if Susie leaves, you have no idea how to get that information back, we should talk about your exit strategies. So those can be some weaknesses we might find through this plan. Training employees who receive mail to distinguish legal filings from scams. You would be surprised at how often this happens. We find out 6 months later that somebody got a default judgment against them, or we find out that somebody was actually trying to communicate about an issue and it was getting ignored. And it's because somebody who was receiving mail thought that it was a scam and was just throwing it away. So training employees to understand what those look like. If you have a gut feeling about a client, keeping extra notes and timelines is a good way to kind of look at things earlier. So some of some of the action items from this might be keeping a good note keeping system. Know that everything you do and say is going to come out in a litigation. So if you're listening to this and you're like, oh gosh, if Joe got sued at my company, we'd be in real trouble because I know the way he talks to people, it's super casual and sometimes it just comes off really crass. And if that ever caused a problem, we're in trouble, then might be good to have some internal training. And to be able to save up some money for a legal retainer so that you can have your choice of attorneys. I put at least $10,000 in here because that's not uncommon for a litigation in the North Metro Colorado area. You can find somebody who can do it for less. You will find some people who require more. If your insurance company is handling this, again, that helps. But those may be some of those weaknesses that you find in your plan. So once you do that plan, you get all of your team together, you say any questions, you walk through. Hard to do a real walk through with a lawsuit. You don't really want to do that, but you can talk through each of those plans with everybody, do any of those necessary trainings. Any questions on the lawsuit emergency plan before we move on to theft?
Doesn't look so right now.
Cool. All right. Feel free, again, pop those in. I know we're doing a lot of things kind of quickly, but we're just sort of doing a sampler platter today. So another common emergency is theft. And here we're kind of including data or physical in the same plan because they're going to have a lot of similarities. Some people are only going to potentially have data theft issues. Some people are only going to potentially have physical theft issues. But basically, what do you do in the event of a theft? So scenario, remember we're doing what, then who, then where, and then some other recommendations. So in scenario number 1, your server gets hacked and everything stored on it disappears. You haven't received a ransomware email yet, but you suspect ransomware. This is especially important for those fiduciaries, the ones who are storing a lot of financial information for people or health information. Alternative what? You come into the office in the morning, see a broken window, and you see that significant amounts of inventory and equipment are gone. So if you do art retail, maybe you come in and you see that several paintings and prints are gone, as well as 2 company computers. That's also a problem. Most of us don't have as hard of a time identifying this as an emergency than as the lawsuit. But what makes this an emergency? You're missing things valuable to the business. This may have some immediate requirements. It may have some immediate safety requirements. It may have some immediate actions in order to get any sort of compensation. If there's a data breach, you may have reporting requirements that have to be done within 30 to 45 days if you don't retrieve that information. So you may have some immediate timelines that you need to deal with. You may also have damage to your building, to your systems, to your physical property. And so that's going to take that time and resources to deal with. Sometimes this can also create psychological issues in that your employees feel less safe, or maybe your clients feel less safe coming to your office, or they don't feel comfortable giving you items anymore. So that can make this an emergency in that it harms your ability to do significant work in the future. So that's all makes this an emergency. But again, I think a lot of times people feel more comfortable with this as an emergency than the lawsuit. So who needs to be involved in this? Again, that company attorney can be very helpful. These are not necessarily in the order that you need to call the person, just for the record. It's more in the order that they often come up as questions. And so your company attorney can be very helpful to call on this one. What do you do? And they can walk you through the process if you're uncomfortable with the process. If client's material went away, so if a client purchased that artwork and you hadn't shipped it yet, you may need to speak to that client or that customer and let them know that this art item got stolen. If you have a replacement, you let them know that the replacement was there. If not, you tell them you're going to give them a refund, or that you're going to let them know as soon as you can get a replacement. If it's data, if your client data got stolen, you will need to let them know what got taken, who you suspect took it, warn them to get a credit check, all of those requirements. Insurance, again, always insurance. Most of these are going to be insurance. If you have an emergency, that's why you have it. That's why you're going to deal with it. And so if you have a cyber policy, they'll help you with that data theft. They'll walk you through some of those procedures, as will your attorney. Your IT will help with that as well, how to figure out what was taken, how to recover things if possible, how to segregate information that wasn't taken so that you can continue using it, or that you can continue operating to the best of your ability while you figure this out. If you're having a physical theft, well, you're going to need to talk to insurance both about any physical damage to the property as well as replacement value of that property. So if you need to replace your inventory, or if you need to replace your computers. If it is a data, who's responsible for backup storage? That might be IT, hopefully IT if you have IT. It might not be. It might be that you have to go to the basement and get that backup hard drive that you back up every 6 months. Fantastic. But we need to know who's responsible for that and bringing that in. Local police. This is one that people don't tend to forget about if there's a physical theft, if there's a data theft. And oftentimes there's very little the local police can do with a data theft. But sometimes it is important to report it anyway. Follow the advice of your attorney and insurance on that one. But if you have had a physical break-in, it can be very important to at the very least make the police report. They can then seek out who has broken in. Sometimes your insurance company will require a police report in order to do anything. If you have a landlord and it was a physical break-in, you may need to inform the landlord, hey, the window's broken, I need you to come get that fixed. Security company, if applicable, if you use ADT, hey, we need that footage. We need to know what happened here. How did you let this happen? Did you not get a silent alarm? Have you not notified the local police? Hopefully the security company, if you have it and you have a physical break-in, has notified the local police. If you have an online security company, same questions, just on the computers. So much more extensive group of people who are involved in a theft situation. What are your wheres? Well, where could the break-ins happen in your company? Where are your weak points? So if you're on the 17th story of a high-rise building, you're probably okay with those windows. But if you're on the ground floor, that might be a thing you need to be concerned about. Do you need bars on the windows? Do you need extra cameras pointed at them? If you have vehicles, company vehicles, do you need extra security on those vehicles to prevent break-ins while you're out in the field? If you are a computer user, well, is that cloud system you're using really secure? Is that likely to be where that is? Or are employees taking computers all out into the field? Could somebody take their computer from their car and then all of a sudden have access to all of your data? What about phones? Are your employees using their phones to access company emails? Where are the tempting targets kept? And part of this is knowing what your tempting targets are. So if you're in a law office, what I think of as the tempting targets may be different from what somebody else thinks of as the tempting targets. My giant copy machine is probably not a tempting target. It's hard to move. It's hard to get out of there. You might be able to resell it, but there's this ID number on it that might not be good. But if I keep cash, that's going to be more valuable. And if I believe that the information for my clients that I keep is valuable, I may pay a ransom to get that back. So you have to know what your tempting targets are. Financial information should always be assumed to be a tempting target. Cash should always be assumed to be a tempting target. Where's the backup kept? And when I say backup, I mean data backup, but also spare equipment. Do you have old computers that you could pull out, dust off, and use if somebody steals a computer? If you have inventory in your retail, do you have the ones that are actually about to be shipped in this location, but you do actually have a storage facility that has backups? Good to know where those are so that you can go access those quickly, do replacements. Where are you going to keep and save things until you feel safe in that space again? So if it's, again, if your cloud got hacked, do you have a backup physical hard drive that you can use? If your location got broken into, are people going to work from home temporarily? Are you going to keep things in a warehouse? What are you going to do during that time period? So some key recommendations on these, and I'm not going to go over each of them because we are running low on time and you guys all will get these slides. But again, this is identify your weaknesses as you're going through these, and maybe include some other non-emergency plans here, like technological literacy, security checks. Some local police stations will actually provide a service for businesses where they'll come and do a security walkthrough of your space with you and point out potential issues. So like if you don't have lighting in parking lots, they'll say this might be a safety issue if you have people going home later at night. So if you're uncomfortable doing these things on your own, sometimes you can use IT for data or actual police or security companies to help you with this. And then always have a strategy for how to keep working if your workspace is compromised. And that's going to be very industry specific. If my office is broken into or if there's a fire, we can work from home. That's not a problem. However, if our cloud is down, that's a real problem. So knowing the distinction between those things, what do we actually do if the cloud is down? What do we do if the internet is down? How do we get backups going? How do we communicate that we're going to be down for a half day or a full day with clients? Do we really communicate with them that we're going to be down for a half day or only if it's a longer period of time for that? If the kitchen is down at the restaurant, how much can you actually do with that? Very little. You're going to close for the day. You're going to get an emergency contractor in. Try your best to do that. Maybe work with a local a partner restaurant where your chefs can go help relieve some of theirs, and that you give clients a coupon if they show up to your place and it's closed and they go to this other place instead. There's some different options there. But keep these in mind as you're going. Any questions on data and physical theft before we go to physical emergencies?
I have a quick question, Samantha, about data theft. Do you need to let all of your clients know about that, or only clients that you think are directly impacted?
Yeah, so part of the reason that there's that 30 to 45 day waiting period is to determine the extent of what was taken and to determine the potential impact. So you only, under Colorado law, you only have to notify Colorado residents whose personally identifiable information was taken or you believe to have been taken. So if you go through that check with your IT department and you can't figure out what was taken, you kind of have to tell everybody who you believe you've collected personally identifiable information on. If you don't collect personally identifiable information on, you don't have to tell anybody. So this can also be a good reason to have good document retention plans and to pull things off of a cloud system when you don't need them. If you have to notify 15 years worth of clients, that you don't know what just happened to their email addresses or credit card information, you're not going to have a fun time with that.
Yeah. Good to know. Thank you.
Yeah,
So we don't have any other questions right now.
Cool. All right, well, I'm gonna kind of speed through these last ones because I want to be respectful of everybody's time, and you kind of get the gist now as we're going through this. So physical emergencies. We kind of group both health related and natural disaster related in here. These are also, I've seen them called classical emergencies. These are the ones that nobody questions why it's an emergency. So some of the examples here are that a client is in your workspace and drops to the floor and they appear to be having a seizure. You have no idea what's going on. Another possibility, and this sadly has become a less unexpected emergency around here lately, you've received notice that a wildfire is fewer than 5 miles from your office space and moving quickly in your direction. These are the kinds that none of us question that we need to call emergency response if somebody else has not at the moment. If we've received notice of the wildfire, somebody else has probably done that. If there's a fire in our building, we have no question there that we need to call emergency response. So this is a little longer, you see, whoever is at the physical workspace when this is happening. So if it's a person having a medical emergency, it's the subject. The immediate response individual, that's the person who sees the subject having a seizure. That might not be everybody's favorite time to be an immediate response individual, but that is the person who sees it and is the one who's capable of reporting the emergency. Ideally, if there's multiple people, there is a different person who calls the emergency team than the one who immediately deals with the emergency, and a different person who calls the point of contact, and hopefully a different person who calls any client facing issues or, hey, we can't come out there right now. Somebody's having a seizure. The client who's supposed to meet with you in 5 minutes, or the person who's supposed to meet with you in 5 minutes is medically unavailable to come here. Hopefully that's a different person calling those people than emergency contact. We don't always have that freedom. Person who gives the all clear once done. Local emergency response teams, again, insurance, always. Loved ones of key people in your workspace. Some people feel uncomfortable collecting this information. It can be really important, and the most important thing is to know that you're not going to abuse this. This really is emergency contact information. Hey, if you hit your head and go unconscious, who do you want me to call to meet you at the hospital? That's not overbearing. That's cautious. Hopefully you never, ever, 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 ever need to use that information, but it's important for some people to know, like, I'm not going to text them to come out and get beers with us. This is really kept in a safe space. It's for an emergency. Clients, you don't always have that information. If you're working in a retail environment, you're not going to get that information for every client. You're going to have to rely on the local emergency response teams to help gather that information. Always work with your insurance and attorneys to figure out what you can do yourself versus what not. But if you are somebody who, say, runs a care facility or goes to care for people in their home, that might be valid information for you to collect. If you work with kids, you should definitely collect it. Regardless, that's a very important thing to have. And then sometimes a remediation or cleanup team, especially in the event of some of these physical emergencies. Who can you call to get rid of the smoke damage? Who can you call to clean up the biological fluids? It's not a fun way to say it, but I can tell you it's a heck of a lot less fun when you're in the midst of it and have no idea what to do. Where are your key medical supplies kept? Some of us just have bandages and aspirin. That's fine. You just need to know that if that's the case. If you have defibrillators, great. Where are those kept? How often are they kept charged? How do you replace them? If you know that somebody in your office has a specific emergency condition, where is their life-saving medical device or medication? Are they willing to share that? If they're willing to share that, fantastic. If they're not, that's a personal choice. You can't force your employees to do it. But same as the emergency contacts, you just want to clarify that you're doing this in case they can't be asked the question later. We will never use this for other reasons. Fire alarm, sprinkler systems, security systems. Your insurance might ask you about the sprinkler systems, because if you have a fire, but then your computers are destroyed from the water, that can be an important factor for them. So if you have ways to not have computers directly under the sprinklers, they might ask you to do that. We're available phones. And then the key recommendations: have a fire drill from time to time. Have a medical response training if appropriate for your workspace. If it's just you, probably less important to have a fire drill. More important to know, what do you grab in the event of a fire? None of us like to think about that, but it is a thing that we do. Create communication standards designed not to panic people. You don't want the office gossip necessarily to be the one telling everybody everything, unless she has been trained to be like, we want you to do this because you know the most people, and we think that you can keep everybody calm in a very effective way. Please don't try and make this dramatic, sort of thing. It's a delicate line as far as that goes, and one that needs to be thought about. And then owner a key employee inaccessibility. I use this a lot as an example at the beginning, which is good because we're almost out of time. You have that one person who knows all of the passwords and they get hit by a bus and they're in a coma. How do you pay the bills? How do you pay payroll? You just can't operate without that person. Sometimes it is the person. If you do this plan, you need that person to be part of the plan, because you also need to know who in their life is that spouse or emergency contact. Who do they talk to at payroll? Who can we get help with? Where are their passwords kept? Are you going to need to retrieve a work computer that is kept at their home? This one, the parting thought that I will leave with this is a really great one to practice while people are on vacation. Sometimes people choose to just say, well, you're going on vacation, we're just not going to do X until you get back. A better plan is to say, cool, you're going on vacation. This is a good time for us to make sure that we know how to do X if something were to happen to you. And then when they come back, you recap how this went. So this can be a really easy one to practice in a less scary situation. This can be a really important one to practice otherwise. So there is no fun way to do these or talk about these. I appreciate you guys all hanging in there with me on these. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us, or we do the SBDC consultations. And I apologize for going ever so slightly over. If you wanted to stick around and ask me some questions, I'm here, Hannah. I don't know if we can do that, or if they should just email them to me.
Yeah, either will work. If you do have questions, feel free to, we can stay on and talk through those. And as Samantha mentioned, we do have free one-on-one consultations available. So happy to get you connected with one of those appointments. And yeah, like we all said, the information will be coming to you so you can review all of this. So thank you so much, Samantha. This was really helpful and so clear of, what your steps, the order of your steps are when something like this happens. So it's really helpful to think about these things ahead of time so that you can stay clear-headed throughout an emergency like this. So thank you so much for all of the content, and thank you everyone for joining us. If you do have to head out now, please join us for a future session. And if you do want to stick around for some questions, we'll be here.
Awesome. And I think, like Samantha just said, I hope some of you also feel better prepared than you did when you came in. Like, I actually do some of these things. I know some of these things. And if that's the case, that's awesome. Just make sure you have them written down somewhere where it's not just in your head, and everyone can be prepared.
Yes, fantastic. Awesome. All right, well, I'm not seeing any questions come in. So I will be following up with the information. And for anyone who does want to ask their questions after it's sat with you a little bit, we can always set you up with an appointment. So thank you all for joining, and Samantha, and we will see you all next time.
Have a good one, everyone.